Paint with me! Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be making a mushroom painting on this little canvas that I found in my extras. It did already have something on it from a few years ago, but I had no plans to continue this painting, so I figured starting with a fresh coat of paint was the better option than to just paint over this. Here I'm starting on the stems of the mushroom. These are going to be Amanita mushrooms, which is one of the most popular kind of mushrooms in media, but they are generally very poisonous, so please do not eat these. They do look delicious, though. If I was a little fairy, I would want to live in one of these mushrooms. Now I'm adding the grass. I changed brush to give it a more defined texture. You'll see me doing that a lot, switching brushes to get the kind of texture that I want. And always dipping in the water and cleaning off my brush is very important to make sure paint doesn't cake up on the bottom of the brush. Now you'll see me start on the top of the red mushroom. Um, I used this kind of thin at the tip and thick at the bottom, very smooth brush. And that really helped me to get the round shape of the top of it. And here you're about to see me go in with a darker color for the grass. I found a really good tip recently that was to paint in the medium shade and then add your dark and light to that. I've been painting for as long as I can remember, but my process for the longest time was just go at it. So I like to share what little tips and tricks that I've found through painting and being on the internet, looking at painting tips. It's so hard to find something that works for you. I found this really works for me to add depth. I like to add the darker tones first. You'll see I completely disregard that statement with the mushrooms, but with the grass specifically, I like to go in with the darker tones first. And then once I know really what I'm doing, I'll go back in with more lighter tones to really highlight what I'm doing. There is a little pond here that I'm going to be adding in, although I'm not super happy with it by the end of the painting. I do like that it's there. It adds a nice sense of depth. And I feel like it helps to tie in the shadows that we'll be doing later on. I do use like a blue tone for the shadows that I use. With the background, I was a little lost. I knew I wanted some kind of bush or some kind of tree in the background, and I wanted these mushrooms in front of you to feel huge. I wanted them to feel like you're walking underneath them. But I wasn't sure how to accomplish that and have a background that wasn't just sky. So here I'm just filling in green because I know I want some kind of bush there. And it does muddy the grass a little bit, but we will define that later on. So this is just to get the color down. It does help for me specifically to do just colors and then to go in, like I said, with the shadows and highlights to really refine things. There I did a little bit of highlight on the mushroom, and I'm going to be doing more highlight on this one. I wanted more of a lighter color for the mushroom, so I think I was more so trying to change the color of it than highlight, but it did end up helping a lot with the highlighting. I'm also adding some texture to the bottom. You can't really see it because of the glare from the light. I'm so sorry about that. But I'm adding highlight and blending it out. The paint is still a little wet. I find mixing with water works really well. I'm using acrylic paints. I do have experience with oil paints, but I find that acrylic paints just work better for my workflow. Oil paints take so long to dry, and the mixing of the colors is it's an art form all in itself that I would need to practice before I even got there. Now you can see here I'm going back in and defining the gills of the mushroom. That's what it's called on the underside of the mushroom. So it looks kind of like gills on a fish. I'm doing it for both of them, but I want it to be more prominent on the one in front because that one is going to be bigger. This angle doesn't really convey the size of the mushrooms very well, but my tripod is not the best. She's on her last legs, so we're working with what we got. Here I thought I was going to define the grass with the lighter shades, but it just did not go how I wanted. The shade of green that I chose was just too bright, so I switched lanes to getting more color down on the water. Here I have to finally decided I'm going to be doing a leafy texture for the background of the painting. And I'm building up just very simple leaf shapes. And I'm doing it all over, even in the areas that you can't particularly see it, because I'm using the same dark green color. I'm doing it that way to just build up the texture of the leaves, and then later it'll be easier to find and refine. I gotta say, this is one of my favorite parts of the painting process, was the leaves. The leaves and the shadows were some of my favorite parts. Here I'm going to go in with a slightly more blue shadow. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm using blue and green, mixing them together for my shadows, because I'm going to be using a very warm light later on, and the coolness of the shadows will really help to define the lights. It'll help to really sell the illusion that there is light going on within this painting. I just love the look of the leaves. Oh, and there I'm going with some highlights, just a lighter green and some more of the base color. I found another green that worked really well for this. It's at this point that I'm experimenting a little. I go in for the shadows on the mushrooms themselves. It's very subtle at first, but it really helps once we get the lights in. This was also one of my favorite parts. I just love doing the shadows. You'll see me adding a little bit of yellow to the mushrooms here for some more highlighting. And that's because I know I want there to be lights underneath the mushrooms as well, kind of casting upwards to sell the illusion of how tall the mushrooms are. I'm also using, like I said, a warm tone for my lights. Ooh, there is the kind of preliminary placement of all the little lights. Some of these don't end up making it in, but this is generally where they're going to be at the end of the painting. With the fairy lights, I wanted it to be a very soft glow. So I'm mixing my yellow with my paint water and going over the little dots with it and just doing a little bit on the things around it to give them a yellowish hue. I'm also doing this with the grass. I'm also doing this with the bush leaves over there in the corner. And this part of the painting process is really about just going in and fiddling with everything because I have almost all of the key elements here. I fiddled with the water for a very long time. I'm still not 100% happy with how it turns out at the end, and I did change it after this recording, but I think it serves its purpose. Sometimes it's not about having the most realistic or beautiful looking piece, but it's about just communicating the idea. And as long as it is clear what the idea is, as long as it's clear what the painting is about, I feel like I can, pat myself on the back and say, good job for this one. Of course, that doesn't really apply to all kinds of paintings, but it applies to this one. Here we're going to be adding a little path into the middle of it to add more depth. And then I'm going to go back in with that really textured brush from the very beginning to layer the grass over top of it. On these foot-worn paths, there's always some grass poking out in little bits, so I wanted to include that. Here we are adding just a little more brightness to the fairy lights. I thought the yellow wasn't communicating enough that there was a light source here, so I decided to go in with some pure white to really like make it stand out exactly where the light is. I'm also going to be going with yellow and making the area around the light a lot clearer. I wanted a more paint texture to the lights, if that makes sense. Overall, this was a really fun painting to do. I haven't painted in a while, so this was really nice to get back into the flow of things. And mushrooms are one of my favorite things in the world. I have about a million little mushroom figures and plushies. If I could grow them, I would, but I don't know how to. Here we're adding some itty bitty mushrooms in the background, and a little bit in the foreground too. I wanted there to be more of that red throughout. Oh, I think they're just so precious. Adding some spots to the mushrooms and then going back in with a more shadowed tone to cover up some of them in the darker area. And now I'm just doing some last minute fiddling. Thank you so much for watching my video, and thank you if you stayed to the end. Thank you if you were at the very beginning. I hope you enjoyed the process. I really enjoyed getting to make this painting, and I'm going to have some still images of it once it's all dried at the very end. Thank you for watching.